Hi, it's Chaplain Michele. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Transform. Today's focus is spiritual wellness. Spiritual wellness. What is spiritual wellness and what are the core elements of spiritual wellness? How do you even measure spiritual wellness? The first core element of understanding, the building block really, of understanding anything about ourselves and our lives is to understand that everything is spiritual. Everything is spiritual. And I'm going to use an example that I typically use, which is a chair. And this could apply to anything. But if you're sitting on a chair, or if you're near a chair, or if you can see a chair, that chair was an idea before it was an actual physical thing that you could call a chair. The idea is the spiritual component, the process and the part that you cannot see, but that was necessary not just to put the chair in place, but to keep it in place. Everything is spiritual. So if you take that concept, that spiritual principle, and apply it to yourself, you will realize that although there are multiple dimensions of wellness, the spiritual wellness dimension is the one that touches everything else because it precedes and sustains everything else. We are all spiritual, even if we are not religious. I want to say that again, because this is one of the reasons I believe we don't talk about spirituality and spiritual wellness. Being spiritual and being religious are two separate things, and I'll explain a little bit more later. But we are all spiritual, even if we are not religious. What do I mean by this? You cannot achieve holistic well-being if you are not well in each dimension of you, especially the spiritual dimension of you. All 8 dimensions of wellness, the model that I've previously shared with you, contribute something to your process individually and something to our process as human beings, collectively. In very succinct terms, spiritual wellness consists of belief. What do I believe? What do you believe? Values. Who and what do I value? Who and what do you value? Conviction. What brings me conviction? And spirit, soul, body congruence. How do my spirit, my soul, and my body work together? At the end of the day, spirit drives everything else. But we translate through the soul, and then the soul informs behavior and speech. So if something is out of whack or off kilter or askew, if we believe one thing but are behaving in a manner that's contrary to that, that means that somewhere in our soul there is something that's getting lost in translation, creating spirit, soul, body incongruence, which is not wellness as it relates to versus spirit, soul, body congruence, which is spiritual wellness. Spiritual wellness or lack thereof drives your thoughts, your behavior, and your speech. And when I say thoughts, I'm talking about the totality of what comes out of our souls, your soul. So if you think about the soul, it's often called mind, but it immediately, for many people, when they say mind, you think intellect. It's not just about intellect. It's not just about brain work. This is the spiritual work of the soul, which is to bring all of the physical, emotional, the intellectual, the psyche, the mentality, psychology, all of those things together, emotionality, ego, all of those components together reside in the soul. So there's the element that does involve the brain, but then there's also the spiritual element, which may not involve the intellect, which may need to bypass the intellect because of limiting thoughts or belief. So ultimately, the thought process, we talk a lot about mindset. What exactly is that? It has to do with the soul. What I believe illuminates what I think. And my ability to govern how I think has to do with all of the things that I just mentioned, emotionality. And some of it, I will say, is based on spiritual genealogy, how much of it is inherited versus how much of it is of my own making or your own making. And it may surprise you to know or to find out that some of what you're dealing with in your life, not all, but some of what you're dealing with in your life, just like we have a medical history or a family genealogy, you have a spiritual genealogy that's come through that same lineage and ancestry. And you have to pay attention to that, because one of the reasons we experience challenges in overcoming certain things is because we don't pay attention or aren't aware of the fact that the spiritual conveys and drives everything else. So spiritual wellness or lack thereof drives your thoughts and therefore your behavior and your speech. Spirit illuminates soul, and soul informs behavior. When we understand that everything is spiritual or originates from a point or process that is invisible to us, we can make the correlation between our own thoughts, speech, and behaviors and our personal spiritual wellness. So if we are willing to ask ourselves the hard questions, to do what's called in psychological circles or psychology circles, the deep work on ourselves, we can tell if we're spiritually well or not. I've had numerous situations, still do. Hopefully I'm getting better. I believe I am getting better at it. Understanding why I believe and want one thing in the best sense, but then I'm not able to execute. Because I had to learn through my own series of situations and circumstances that I had inherited some things, and there were some things that I just either didn't know or wasn't paying attention to. And the same is true for each and every human being, including you. Assessing and understanding your spiritual wellness requires introspection or looking forward. However, we are conditioned as human beings to look externally for most everything because it's convenient, right? It's convenient. We can see it. I know what's happening. I feel like I have control if I can see progress, if I can see what's going on. But that is actually the least of things, because that process, whether good or bad, originated from a spiritual principle or position. Everything is spiritual. However, I'll repeat, so we are conditioned to look externally for most everything. So to some degree, although many are religious, spiritual wellness remains a foreign concept. Assessing your spiritual wellness. Now, this is primarily a personal exercise because you and you alone are the steward of your own beliefs, convictions, and values. No one can have those for you. So as human beings, when we are placed here in this place we call Earth, planet Earth, we come with some things inherited, a spiritual ancestry, as well as a physical or medical genealogy. But we also come as a clean slate. So there's all of the above. It's not an either or, it's a both and. At the point when you are able to make distinctions and make decisions on your own, you then become the steward of what you believe. So even though you might have been raised to believe one thing, there is a point of distinction and differentiation, and you generally see it. You can see it in the terrible twos, although it's not as pronounced as maybe when we get to adolescence, to the teenage years, to the young adult years, where there is a intention to differentiate and to make ourselves distinguished from. And that's a process we have to go through. It may be that we end up coming back to how we were raised. But it may be that we decide that certain values, beliefs, and convictions, we have to make those things on our own. All of us go through the process. And that's what we are designed to do, is to go through that process. So you can't let anyone cheat you out of that. That is something you have to go through. And it's okay to test, right? Do I really believe this? How do I feel about this? What are my convictions? What are my beliefs? What are my values? Differentiation. 3 events that can negatively impact spiritual wellness are bereavement or loss, betrayal, and disappointment. There are others, but they're generally going to fall into these categories. In fact, they all fall under bereavement and loss. Loss, even though the loss can ultimately prove to be good for us, if we can see that. Betrayal is a loss. Disappointment is a loss. So generally everything that creates negative impact is some sort of a loss, or something we perceive as a loss or a bereavement. Something was taken from me. And it doesn't matter what it is, spirit, soul, or body. It doesn't matter. Something was taken from me. Someone left. Something ended. And all of these, some of these things are natural. Other things can be unnatural in the sense that somehow they're part of my process, but they're not necessarily natural to the process. So 3 events that can negatively impact spiritual wellness. I say bereavement and loss as a separate thing, but really everything comes under that category. Bereavement, loss, betrayal, and disappointment. 3 events that can positively impact spiritual wellness. 1, appreciation. Do not underestimate the power of appreciation, even to people you don't know, even to people you don't agree with. I appreciate that thought. I appreciate you sharing that thought. Why? Because you don't have to agree with someone to validate the time and energy and effort that they put into something. Now, if it doesn't jive or vibe with your spirit, then that's fine. But you can thank you for showing up. I appreciate you showing up. Me saying that to you or you to me at times when we may not agree does not mean that I also am buying into things that I don't agree with. I don't have to dislike you to appreciate you. I may not appreciate your thought process. I may not appreciate how you arrived at your decision, but I recognize that you're going through a process just like I'm going through a process. And we're all still, under construction, so to speak, in many ways. At the same time, we have to be mindful that when we do appreciate people, it helps us. When we appreciate each other, we think it takes away from the process, but it adds to the process. So if we want people to appreciate us, the thing that we have to give is appreciation. But we can't do it out of a selfish position. It has to be purely because I recognize that you as a person are going through the same or similar things, even though it might look different as I am. Why? Because that is the destiny of the human race. We all go through things individually and collectively at the same time. But without the individual process, there is no collective process. And we can't mistake a collective process for an individual one. It all starts, the building block of society is the individual who is making the decisions, the family unit, the support system, whatever terms we want to give to it. Support system is comprised of people. So the human race is designed, we are designed to help each other. We're interconnected. We're interconnected and we're interdependent. That doesn't mean I have to know you or know everything about you. It just means that I appreciate that you got your own things and process that you are working out just like me. So, three events that can positively impact spiritual wellness: appreciation, kindness, and fulfillment. I think in many instances, we consider these things, demonstration or expression of these things, to be weaknesses, when in fact, the expression of these things proves strength, not weakness. We are weaker when we don't do it, because it means that we feel like either we feel inferior or superior. I can appreciate you and not agree with you. I can appreciate you and not know you. I can show kindness to you. We cross paths with people all the time that we don't know. That doesn't mean we cannot be kind to them. Fulfillment. Fulfillment is more a personal thing. Goals, dreams being fulfilled. Sometimes those goals and dreams have to be realigned because they are not realistic in the context of where we are right now. It's okay to have goals and dreams. What is not okay is to let those goals and dreams pull you away from the moment in a way that makes you miss what's happening right in front of you. Because all of it contributes to the process. Your life is wherever you are. I don't care where you go and how hard you try to escape things. Your life is always going to be where you are, and you can never hack your process. You just can't do it. Everything is spiritual. So there are things from a spiritual perspective that are known already that are driving your life. And whether you consider those things to be good or bad does not matter. You need to understand what they are. So then you can make decisions about your own spiritual health and wellness, what you want to give, what you want to keep the steak, spit out the bones. You get to choose what kind of person you are going to be, but you're not going to blame that on anyone else, because from a spiritual perspective, blame does not exist. There is no they, right? If you go back to the previous statement that I made about we are all stewards at that point in time when we're able to make decisions on our own, we become stewards then of the value. And so there is some differentiation and distinction that has to take place. So it all becomes spiritual. We get to decide, but there is no they. There is no they spiritually. It's your process, so you're accountable. We can help one another. We can encourage, but I can't live your process for you any more than you can live mine for me. At the end of the day, when the transition out of the physical body happens, spirit and soul remain in place. Everything associated with the physicality is going to drop. It's going to fall away. So we have to work on the primary thing, spirit and soul, so that we can live a healthy, prosperous, transformed, transcendent life while we're here. Improving your spiritual wellness requires consistency and constancy. Consistency, and this is just a loose translation for the sake of this segment. Consistency is I do certain things repeatedly. That doesn't mean I get stuck in a rut. That doesn't mean that if the situation calls for an adjustment, that I don't make the adjustment. That doesn't mean that I can't be flexible, agile, nimble. I have to be all of those things. And people will say, well, people don't like change. Well, we don't have to like it. Change is spiritual. So it's happening regardless of whether we like it or not. And this is why we don't mature, right? Our physical bodies grow. We don't really have control over that. We can do things to enhance or diminish them, but we came in to the earth with a if you want to call it a pre-programmed growth plan, physically. And unless we do something, then that's what happens. Unless we do something to interrupt that, something unnatural to interrupt that. But spiritual wellness requires intentionality. I don't have to be intentional about growing unless I'm trying to do something once I realize certain things about my body, right? Some people choose to make enhancements. Some people don't take care of themselves. Whatever the situation might be, it doesn't matter. It's not a judgment. It's an observation about who we are as human beings. So, yes, we're going to grow. We grow into the people that we become. And I'm not talking about anyone else intervening, including us. The physical part is done. We come with that. The part we don't get and we don't understand is that the spiritual maturity, the spiritual wellness, it has to happen in order for us to grow spiritually. It has to be intentional. I have to recognize that everything is spiritual. I have to recognize that I am spirit first. I have to recognize that I am spiritual even if I'm not religious. You have to recognize the same thing, or your life will not find the congruence and cohesion that it needs for you to experience wellness in every area of your life. So consistency speaks to practices that we identify that help us grow spiritually. Oh, you know what? Yesterday, this is an example, but we've all been there because we've all lied. I don't care what you call it. I don't care what color you give it. And I'm going to say something about blame, go back to the point about blame in a second. But we've all lied. If we've not lied to ourselves, we've lied to other people. Most of us have done both multiple times and are still doing it right now. But if I recognize from my beliefs, my values, my convictions, that that's not what I want to do, then I have to intentionally make changes or engage in practices that help me not to lie. Does that mean it's perfection? No, we're not going to be, we're not seeking perfection. Perfection for us does not exist in the way that we think. What we are supposed to be doing is growing into our destiny. Our purpose here is to grow into our destiny. And our purpose for being here is to become transformed to the point that we can give an account for who we are and how we have lived these lives that we have been entrusted with. Okay? Consistency, so it's a series of practices that can be and should be adjusted as time goes on so that we understand whether or not we are maturing spiritually. We can be anti-aging, but which is a whole other thing, but we should not be anti-maturity. Two different things. Aging is physical, which is the least of our concerns, or should be. Maturity is spiritual, which should be paramount, even tantamount to everything else. We should not only be growing physically, but maturing spiritually and emotionally, right? Spirit and soul should mature even as we see potential diminishing of the body. This is what we don't understand. So consistency is the practices. Constancy is staying with it. Consistency is I have these things that I do on a regular basis. Constancy is even when it doesn't look like I'm having any results. Constancy. I'm going to be constant. I'm going to show up. I might take a day off. I might have to chill out. I might have to have a quick reset. But at the end of the day, my intent is still the same. And so on that note, I want to talk about blame because there's a lot of that goes on, lower level and high level. But there is no, I want to repeat this because this is very important for all of us. There is no blame in the spirit. So we think that if something goes wrong or something I don't like, or there's a result, I don't want you to have something, but I want to have it, or something happened that I don't like, but I don't want to take responsibility for, we think that we can blame other people, and that absolves us of any responsibility. And that's just, from a spiritual perspective, that does not work. There is no they, there is you, because you are the steward. You are. You are the steward. No one else is stewarding your life for you unless you're letting them do that. And even to that extent, you're still the steward because you're letting them do it. So move away from one thing that is spiritually is immature, is thinking that it now and I want to clarify, because it doesn't mean that other people haven't negatively impacted your life. There is such a thing as actual and perceived offenses. There are things that people do to us, in spite of us, to spite us. There are things that happen. So this is not saying those things don't happen. This is saying the response of blaming someone because I don't want to grow, because you don't want to grow, because you're not doing what you're supposed to do, does not hold water spiritually. Just because we choose not to do it doesn't mean the opportunity does not exist. So there is no they. There is a we, because we're all part of the human race. And as much as sometimes we are divisive about that, it doesn't change the fact that from a spiritual perspective, we are still all humans. Who are spiritual first. So I hope that sticks with you, because it's impacting your life in more ways than you understand, and you think, well, they did it, so I'm excused. Nope, not how it works. Not how it works. It's never been how it works. They is never the reason for you not to do something when you have opportunity to do it. So continuing, you have to develop practices that nurture, that feed, that nourish, that develop, that mature your spirit. In some circles, it's called spiritual formation. I call it spiritual growth and development. Because yes, we can take in information. Just like I hope if you're listening, you're getting something out of what I'm saying. We can take in information, but at the end of the day, who's going to decide what happens to that information? You. No one can force us to develop spiritually. It's intentional. You have to want it, and you have to understand the significance of it. We don't like talking about things like eternity because it tends to pull us into religious discussions or religious discourse that we might not want to engage in. But regardless of whether we engage in the religious discourse or not, eternity is still a thing. You're in it right now. Time is not separate from eternity. It is a manifestation of eternity. Meaning, there is something outside of what we know to be time. It doesn't mean that that where we are on the planet Earth is what all of eternity looks like. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we have got to recognize that we came from somewhere. We didn't just show up one day. Like the chair. It might have just shown up at your house, but the development of the first chair was somebody's idea. So we've got to recognize in the spiritual context, eternity is a thing. And so the spiritual principles that I'm sharing with you right now help us mature. If we think we have long days and long years here, this is limited. This is temporary. So we're already in a temporal piece or a temporary piece of eternity so that we can get our stuff together one way or another. And so we can't shy away from the discourse because we don't want to talk about religious things. It's okay. And I'm going to talk about religion in just a second. But the spiritual principle is that eternity exists regardless of whether or not you're religious. You're still spiritual. What drives your physical body? What drives your thoughts? Your spirit. That is the part of you that brings you to life. So develop practices that nurture, that mature, that develop, that grow your spirit into a transcendent state so that you can grow into your destiny, grow into your purpose. We come in looking for purpose. I promise you that if you were born, you have a purpose. If you are here, regardless of when you're listening to this, if you exist, you have a purpose. And your purpose is to go through this process in a way that brings you out better than when you came in. But also that you leave a legacy that people say, they did good in my life. They did good by me. They did right by me. We also have to learn and develop resilience in order to bounce back from challenges. I'm not going to go too deeply into resilience right now, but when you're developing spiritual wellness, your practices, your consistency, your constancy, and all of this won't happen at the same time. So please don't set any unrealistic expectations. We are human. So we're working off some of our humanity so that we can become more spiritual. And I mean in the best sense. In the best sense. But when we do those things, we also develop resilience. Today, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, as I said, on resilience, but we will explore that at some point later. Everything is spiritual, which means spiritual wellness should be the first aspect of our existence that we tend to. Not only that, if we have anyone in our care, whether it's through parenting or guardianship or other means, anyone in our care, the first thing we need to make sure is taken care of is their spirit. What is their spiritual health and wellness like? It doesn't mean, and a lot of this, again, this is simultaneous. But what happens right now is we're very one-dimensional, or maybe two-dimensional. We talk about mental health and we talk about our physical bodies. That is all well and good. But if we're not going to talk about everything at the same time, then those two areas are going to potentially overcompensate for other things, which means it's not healthy at all. We've got to look at the whole picture. Holistic living is what we're after. I like to say the goal is whole. The goal is being whole. So you have to look at the whole thing. What is going to make me holistically healthy, holistically well? Looking at my spirit first, because that's touching everything else. The irony is that we devote more time to what we can see, and I alluded to this and spoke about it earlier, than to what we cannot see, which means that although spiritual wellness supports every other area of our lives, it is often the least tended to. When we experience deficiencies in our life, sometimes the last place we look is at our spiritual health and wellness, when this should be the first place we look. So if I'm having a bad day, I'm going to, because of how we're trained, and I'm saying just to use me as the example, I've learned better. I don't always do better, but fortunately the times that I don't do better are becoming less and less because I continue to be constant in my process, not perfect in my process. Right? So generally, if something happens, I can look at certain things that have happened, people that I've spoken with, people that I've not spoken with, what they said when they spoke, the tone. I can look at all of that, and I can make a very superficial assessment of why X, Y, Z happened. Oh, this happened because of that. We're quick to do it when something happens to us. But we're not so quick to do it when we do something to somebody else. But what I've learned, hopefully you picked up on that last piece, we're not so quick to do it when something happens, when we do things to other people. Well, if it wasn't for, yep, and no. But what I've also learned is that even though I might be able to go through and say, well, this happened, and this is why this happened, and this is why, part of what we talk about a lot in mental health circles is triggering. And triggering is simply that we have unresolved spiritual issues, not just emotional, not just mental health issues. It is an unresolved spiritual issue. Remember, spirit illuminates the soul. It doesn't mean that so we talk about illumination, it doesn't mean that it's good light. It could be bad light. It could be a bad illumination. You've seen things that are badly lit, right? You look at a picture, or you look at, when you're, particularly now in this day and time, when we're doing a lot of video, you can tell when someone is lit well or when they're badly lit. Illumination simply refers to the type of light, to a type of light, that the spirit is providing some level of light, some level of illumination. It's driving your process. So while we can point to all of these external things, what we don't look at is the fact that triggers are based on spiritually unresolved things that then are either for the good or for the bad in our souls, creating a narrative. So we have to learn to go back, okay, why did that bother me? Why did that trigger me? And people even create their language and their speech around the fact that they can trigger you, because they know you're not doing the work. This is the thing. So a lot of times you are triggered because someone has set that up knowing you're not willing to do the work on your own spirit. So I've learned to look at, okay, yeah, this happened. Yep, that did happen. But why am I really acting that way? Why? What about this really bothered me? And then I go back. What do I believe? What do I value? What are my convictions? Where do I feel like my spirit, soul, body congruence really is? What in me is not healed properly or still healing? Because if you touch a scar, it's not going to hurt. If you touch an open wound, you're going to fight, or you're going to want to fight. And so triggering is the ongoing touching of open wounds. So don't let anybody deceive you over this. It's not as complex as we make it, but it's also not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy, because we have to deal with our own pain and our own faults and our own inability to process emotion in healthy ways. We have to deal with a lot of things that actually in the beginning is very painful. We have to deal with a lot of open wounds, either that we thought we could get away with not dealing with, even though they show up in your life every day, or because no one's ever challenged us to deal with it. But you're being challenged. And I don't mean just by me through this podcast. You're being challenged all the time. Everything is spiritual. Everyone is spiritual, although everyone is not religious. Religion is our chosen expression of spiritual beliefs, values, and convictions. It's our chosen expression of spiritual beliefs, values, and convictions. That's what religion is. Everything is spiritual. Everything is not religious. Everyone is spiritual. Everyone is not religious. When we understand the power of the spiritual dimension of our wellness, we will begin to see everything through the lens of our spirituality rather than the lens of our emotionality. We talk about things in the world on the basis of our emotions, with not understanding that everything in the world is being driven by a spirit. What spirit are we operating in? Where is our spirituality? What light are we operating in? Where are we in dealing with our own hurts and our own pains, our own successes, our own failures? Where are we? How do we think about ourselves as it relates to other people? Because even though we may see ourselves either as inferior to or superior to other individuals, we all have the same value. It's just that our circumstances and situations are different. Inherently, as human beings, we all have the same value. It's just that our circumstances, our situations, the decisions we make, how those things show up in society make it seem as if we don't all have value. And that's why we have to start looking through a spiritual lens, because we have the power individually and therefore collectively to deal with ourselves in a way that makes the world a better place. And I don't say that being presumptuous. What I mean is, when we work for the good in me, when I work for the good in me, and you work for the good in you, inevitably, spiritually speaking, that creates good around us. Not just for us, but around us. The question is, do we want good? Because we're all choosing what we want to be and what we want to operate in. And some of you might think it's by default. But again, just like blame doesn't hold water, it doesn't exist in the spirit. Default also does not exist in the spirit. Why? Because time's clicking. You can't have default if time is ticking. You can't have default if change is happening. It's like a current. There is no default. You're either going to move with the current or you're not. That means you're going backward, not forward. There might be a position where we can rest, but even in a position of rest, do not deceive yourself into thinking that means you're in control of time and change. It just means that you've taken a passive position, maybe to catch your breath, to do a reset. Maybe you got the wind knocked out of you. But time is still ticking, and things are still changing. Are we going to grow with that change? Are you going to grow with that change? That's the flow that we're supposed to be in. When we understand, I'm repeating this, when we understand the power of the spiritual dimension of wellness, we will begin to see everything through the lens of our spirituality rather than the lens of our emotionality. I really appreciate you spending this time with me today. Hopefully you've gotten this far. This session is meant to begin to scratch the surface of understanding on what makes us as humans tick as it relates to spirituality and spiritual wellness. When we prioritize our spiritual wellness, it will give us better perspective on every other dimension of wellness and its impact on our lives, but also on our interactions with others. At the end of the day, it's up to each one of us to proactively preserve our health, holistic wellness, and well-being, every single dimension of it. What will you do today in this regard? What will you do for your spiritual health, for your spiritual growth, for your spiritual development? What will you do today to overcome some of the challenges you faced, some of the pain, some of the trauma? It's a big lift. It's a big elephant. You're going to have to take it in small bites, but you've got to take consistency, a small step every day, and stay with the process. Consistency, small steps. Constancy, staying with it until you are whole. Thank you so much. I am grateful for you. I appreciate you. Thanks for spending this time with me. This is Chaplain Michele for Transformed. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.